Welcome to Public Speaking the Basics by the Learning and Development Studio. My name is Peter and I'm actually going to spend the next sort of 20-30 minutes with you talking about some of the things that I've learned after a career of nearly 20 years in public speaking that actually helped me overcome the barriers that I still experience to public speaking. Now, all of us at some point in our careers actually have to speak publicly. Now, whether or not that's in a team meeting, whether or not it's at school or at university or at a conference, even sometimes the horrible experience of speaking to a camera. So I'm actually going to cover some of the more basic things that I think that really help us become better speakers. And I'm going to talk about addressing your fears, what preparation you actually need. I want to talk about warming up and relaxing. I want to talk about opening a speech. We're going to learn about the things that you need to be mindful of when you're speaking, about how to close off a speech at the end, and then we're going to talk about the other tips that I've acquired along the way. Okay, but before we do, I want you to picture that someone has actually come to you and said, I need you to do a speech in front of whatever people on whatever topic on this date. I want you to picture, firstly, I want you to picture, how does this make you feel? I want you to think about what's happening to my body. Where am I tense? Is my jaw or is my throat constricted? Has my breathing become shallow? Some people I've taught over the years have panic attacks, which really are these very large physiological symptoms that are happening to them that make it really hard for them to actually overcome the psychological barriers as well as the physical to speaking. I'd like you, if you go back to the top line there, I want you to picture your worst case scenario. And what I mean by worst case scenario, and all of us have it, not often, luckily, it's actually quite rare, is I want you to think about the worst possible thing that could happen to you if you actually have to have a panic attack. And and having been a speaker and an educator for many years, I've experienced my worst case scenario and I've seen people's worst case scenarios. But luckily, that would have to be in my career, of thousands of hours of public speaking. I've probably had my worst case scenario happen to me once. Yeah, once out of thousands of engagements of speaking. But again, it is mindful to be aware of what's our worst case scenario, because chances are it's probably not that bad. Okay, so now that you've pictured your worst case scenario, now, I mean, if you want to write it down, you can press the pause button and then press play again and you can write it down. I now want you to think about what your best case scenario looks like. So again, write it down, press pause if you want to, have a think about it, picture how does my body feel, how much more relaxed do I feel. Some of you aren't going to feel more relaxed because just the sheer idea that you have to public speak is terrifying. And these are all things that we have to push through. Now, I will say about best and worst case scenarios is that I have had best case scenarios happen to me in my life. Luckily, they've happened more frequently than my worst case scenario. But I actually tend to find that most of my experiences are on the spectrum somewhere in the middle, between a best case scenario and a worst case scenario. I just push for the better case scenarios than the worst case. Okay, so you've thought about your best case scenario, you've thought about your worst case scenario. Now, someone's come to you and they've asked you to speak, or they've told you to speak. Often these things aren't actually given to us by choice and we have to stand up in a room. The first thing I'd want you to think about is, well, why are you speaking? Now, we speak to communicate. So my point is, what is it that you're trying to tell them? What is the key points that you need to communicate to these people? And who are these people? So at the same sense, if I'm trying to teach a public speaking class, I would teach a very different class to a group of 17-year-old final year high school students to the way that I'm going to teach a public speaking class to a group of acting students who want to learn about TV presenting. It still does use the same skill, but again, we look at who we're speaking to and why we're speaking, because it will actually impact the level of language we use. It'll also impact the way that we put our speeches together, and it's also about, with the who, it's about what's relevant to them. What do these people need to know? What is it that I need to tell these people? And if you think about it, we public speak, especially those of you that have children, you public speak to children all the time. So really it is about what's that group message, what's that message that I want that group to take away. Now, and that's the point. The second point then comes down to, remember, you've been asked to speak on a subject that you actually would know a lot about. Otherwise you wouldn't have been asked to speak at all. And what I mean by this is that people have asked you to speak or have told you to speak because they want your opinion. I mean, for those of you that are doing it in an academic context, they want you to show off what you've learnt. But nonetheless, you've actually gone away, you've done some research. You might not feel as confident as you would want to be for that, but as in life, we usually aren't as confident as we'd like to be. I often speak about things and think to myself, I hope they don't discover that I'm a fraud. But the simple fact is, I actually know more about the subject matter, usually, than the people who are sitting in the audience, which is why I've been asked to speak, because people ask about my opinion. So in the same sense that if someone came to me and said, Peter, would you speak at a convention of bioethicists and you're going to talk about genetics and ethics, I wouldn't. Because quite simply put, I'm not knowledgeable about that subject area. So, it's really about the fact I would have only been asked to speak on, so I get asked to speak on things like, the performing arts and on acting and on education and issues of sociology in the workplace. The other part is that people actually want to hear a good speaker and are going to be quite receptive and forgiving, because public speaking is a shared dread that all of us have. All of us hate the idea, even the extroverts hate the idea of getting up on a stage or getting up in front of a crowded room of people and speaking. So chances are people are going to be thinking to themselves, oh, thank Lord it's not me. And if you make mistakes, they're going to actually be quite forgiving. So when I say it's okay to make mistakes, of course it's okay to make mistakes, because people aren't there judging you for the mistakes. They're actually listening to the content that you're talking about. I know that when I go to listen to someone speak, I'm not sitting there thinking, oh, they stuttered, oh, they stammered, oh, they repeat themselves. I mean, chances are you've noticed that even, I've got a 20-year career of speaking and you'll hear me stuttering and stammering through this video. You'll notice that more in this, because firstly, I'm talking about public speaking, and second of all, you don't have the visual engagement with me. And that's remembering that 55% of what we say is actually communicated through our body language. So people will be receptive because chances are they want to listen to what you're saying. And of course, it's okay to make mistakes. You're human. You make them. I make them. We all make them. It's just about being as prepared as you possibly can so that you don't. Which then seamlessly transitions me into my preparation. Okay, so when you're preparing a slide, I'm actually going to jump around the points a little bit here. The first thing I actually want to say to you is, when you're writing a speech, don't write the entire speech. Write down your key points, write down your anecdotes, write down the key things you must say. And the reason for that is because you are doing public speaking, not public reading. And public reading is a very hard skill, to actually read something and make it sound like it's natural and smooth. And very few people can do it. And I actually think that if you're reading a subject area that you know a lot about to a group of people, you will have a less receptive audience because you're not engaged with them. And at the end of the day, you write your key points so you can engage with people, so you can talk with them. Practice it. Once you've got this speech down, give it a practice. Talk, do it to yourself, practice your key points, run it to a time. Ask someone who is not going to be a savage critic to actually, to be your audience if you want. It really depends on how nervous that you actually are. That there are some people whom I've practiced my speeches in front of. There are some of my friends and family who even still to this day I would never practice my speech in front of, because they will nitpick the minutiae as opposed to listen to the details. And that does bring me back to what I was saying before. If you were in the audience, what would you like to hear? So at this point, have a think back to some of the best speeches that you've heard, some of the best speakers. And chances are it'll be these imperceptible qualities that you can't pick. What made them interesting? It's because they were personable. It was because they were relaxed. It was because they seemed confident or dynamic, or all of these other things. So for those of you that don't feel like that when you're speaking, and I count myself in that, fake it till you make it. So that's why I say, if you're in the audience, what would you like to hear? Not only is this about faking it till you make it, this is not about actually presenting something that your audience wants to hear, it's also about making it relevant. When I sit in a classroom, when I sit at a conference, when I sit anywhere that has someone speaking, I want someone to have actually told me something of relevance to me, not something that they find particularly interesting to them. And this then brings us down to, does the speech have a logical flow? Okay, so for those of you that have ever written an essay, whether that be at school or at college or at university, or at work or in a vocational context, you'll actually find that speeches, like essays, like debates, have a logical flow. So make sure that it takes you from point to point to point. So therefore, you're not necessarily jumping around, because a speech is like a story. And I really mean this. Think about the stories that you tell. As human beings, we're natural storytellers, and I'd like you to think about the stories that you tell people. And you'll tend to find that they have a logical flow. You know, it's A to B to C, and it's a sequence of events. Okay, in terms of preparation, in terms of the speech, this really depends on larger groups or smaller groups. So are you going to use visual aids? Which is, for instance, one of the most common ones at the moment is PowerPoint, especially in a corporate setting. Which, am I going to have PowerPoints that actually sustain what I'm going to say and back it up? My advice on PowerPoints, that if you do use them, is they are PowerPoint. They just highlight your key points with them, as I have with this video. Are you going to give people a handout? So therefore, is there so much information that you're conveying, you want people to go away and take it away and digest it? Or you might be in a meeting and be talking about, you know, a piece of legislation that's changed. So therefore, you might actually give them a nice 5-page report for them to go away and digest in their own time, while you actually talk about the key points within it. The other part is that if you've been asked to speak for, say, and you've been given an hour to speak, are you going to speak for the whole hour, or are you actually going to set some time aside for questions? Or are you just going to have people sing out to you and ask questions? I'll come to questions a little bit later in this session. And the most important part is, where are your key points? So whereabouts have you placed them? Are they clear? And that's why it's often important to read out something, to practice with an audience. Are the key points clear? Have you actually explained them enough? What's your plan B? Now, my plan B is about, this is when we're about using the extra material, like the visual aids, the PowerPoints. I went to a conference once to speak, and they put the PowerPoints in, and they loaded up all the PowerPoints, and they refused to show. And I had foolishly not printed out a copy of the PowerPoints or written myself speaking notes, because I had decided that I was going to, this was earlier in my career, that I was actually just going to speak to the PowerPoints. So I suddenly found myself in a position where I had travelled to another city in another state to give a speech for 45 minutes to a group of educational professionals in my industry that wanted the benefit of my experience, and found myself thinking, oh dear, I've broken the cardinal rule of public speaking 101. Have a plan B, which just means, you know, that might be as simple as making sure that you have 2 sets of your key points written down in 2 places, or, you know, perhaps having them on PowerPoints, but also having a hard copy on a piece of paper. So what's your plan B is, if I am going to use, if technology fails me, or I don't have an ideal room to speak in or anything like that, what are some of the things that I can do to make sure that I can still speak and not coming across looking stupid? Okay, so where are we at? We've looked at what you're afraid. We've looked at what our worst case scenario is. We've looked at what our best case scenario is. We've gone away, we've done our preparation, we've written our speech, we've practiced it. We're about to walk into the room, sort of 5 or 10 minutes before we go into the room or we go onto the stage, and we're starting to realize that, in fact, you're really nervous. Okay, so my advice is, do some warm-ups. Now, warm-ups can be really simple things. They can be some really simple breathing exercises. For those of you that do a martial art or yoga or Feldenkrais or Pilates or any of those things, chances are, or Tai Chi, you've probably learnt some breathing exercises. If you don't know breathing exercises, one of the most simple ones I've actually learnt, and I learnt this with some professional actors, which is you actually breathe in through the nose and you count to 4 while breathing in through the nose. And then as you release that breath, you actually count backwards from 8. You know, and so you can actually see, you count in your head 1, 2, 3, 4, and then as you're breathing out, actually say it. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Do this a couple of times, and it will really, that breathing will really settle your heartbeat. It'll actually do this about 4 or 5 times, and it will really start to relax you. The other one I'd say to you is stretch your jaw, stretch your tongue. So, and we all know how to do jaw stretches. If you don't, there are many great videos out on YouTube that can show you how to do this. One of my favorite ones is I actually talk about sounding out the alphabet. And this is where we go back to what we deal with as little children. So, A, B, K, D, E, F, J, G. Her. Yeah, now I've got my alphabet wrong. Again, as I said before, we always make mistakes, so I've got my alphabet wrong. But I just keep on moving. So you sound out your alphabet because that sound actually allows you it increases the resonance in your mouth. It actually gets your mouth used to moving, and it increases the crispness of your sounds. Another one I'd say is then hum. Just, get that vibration happening in your teeth. Feel it in your nose. It really means that you've opened up. People talk about our vocal cords, but actually they're not cords at all. They're actually folds of skin within our throat. It's not the most pleasant image. And so when we hum, we actually make them all resonate. So we're actually getting all of our vocal resonators, so the singers talk about, to actually start engaging, and they're actually in a much better position. It's the same way that we warm up before we go to the gym or play sport. Just some neck rolls, and the reason I recommend some gentle neck rolls, and I do mean gentle, don't sling your head around vigorously. The neck roll actually just makes it, again, it relaxes you, because chances are your tension is going to be in your neck or your shoulders or your jaw. I also highly recommend saying some tongue twisters slowly. And tongue twisters are good because they actually just get you used to saying complex things so that we don't confuse ourselves. So, one of the, Peter, Piper, Pictor, and I never remember this one, even though my name's Peter. Many of the ones I know is many marvelous men make much money with my motorbike. So there are great ones that you can look up online and you follow them through, and it's because then your mouth gets used to making these sounds. So it's really about engaging. In order to do this, I've done this with less than 2 minutes before I'm about to. Yes, I've looked a little daft in front of other people, but you know what? I'd prefer to look daft in front of 1 or 2 people before I walk onto a stage than being not understood by the potentially hundreds of people that have sat out in an audience listening to me. Okay, so we've warmed up, we've walked onto the stage. So here are some things that I'd like to tell you. The first part is that during the speech, it's totally okay to pause. And so what I mean by that is that you can think about what you're saying. Politicians do this all the time. Bob Hawke was famous, an Australian Prime Minister was famous for his ums and ahs. And that was really because it was while he could actually consider his thoughts. Don't be afraid to do that. Now, I do say focus on what you're saying. And I knew an acting teacher once who said, once an actor is actually focusing on whether or not they're doing a good performance, they've lost the character. And this is true of public speaking too. Because once I'm actually thinking, are they listening to me? Are they enjoying it? Am I doing a good job? Oh, I shouldn't have said that. I've actually no longer been engaged. I'm no longer engaged with the content. I'm actually thinking, am I doing a good job? And if I'm thinking, am I doing a good job? That's when I'm going to start making errors. And that's when people really probably are going to start to be less forgiving on me. The biggest part is that when I do start getting that fear of, and I've been in audiences where people have rolled their eyes and shifted in their seat, and I've thought, oh dear, I'm losing them. That's when I actually think to myself, no, hold on, I'm not gonna notice those people. I'm not going to focus on that. I know what I'm talking about, and I'm going to focus on what I'm talking about. And I know that I can't please everyone all of the time, so therefore I'm going to give the best possible. I'm just going to focus on what I talk about, and hopefully that means that as many people in this audience as possible will take away from it what they want. And so in that sense, refer to your key points. Refer back. If you've got PowerPoint slides up or you've got them written down somewhere, bring it back to your key points of what is it that I'm actually trying to teach you. The biggest part is that the audience is interested. It's not your place to judge them on that. If they're interested or not, you'll find out soon enough after the speech. Don't think about it when you're in the speech. You have enough going on. Don't allow yourself to get thrown off. And that's probably the most important part. Okay. Now, it doesn't actually matter if you run over or under time. So if someone's asked you to speak for 20 minutes and you speak for 22 minutes, 23 minutes, not such a big deal. Same deal if you speak for 15. I will say though, be concise. When there's a lot of waffle, people do tend to start to not to listen. So be really concise and make sure that you're sticking to your key points. Don't rush. And that's my biggest one. Most definitely don't rush through the content. If people can't understand you, they're going to get quite tetchy and quite fast. Earlier in the session, I'd said assign questions to the end. By all means, assign questions to the end. And the reason that I say this is because when people ask you questions during, it can really upset your flow. And the reason that it can upset your flow is because they might be asking questions that you're going to address later through the content, or perhaps aren't necessarily relevant, but you haven't delved in deep enough yet for people to understand that. Or more than that, it just also means that you do start to lose control of the room. So I would really recommend that when you actually start out, you say to people, I will give you, we'll take 10 minutes at the end to ask any questions. Though, don't shy away from asking rhetorical questions, so again, this is always the exception to the rule. And so rhetorical questions are ones where it was quite clearly not something where your group won't necessarily be able to answer it immediately. And rhetorical questions are quite obvious within themselves. So a rhetorical question can even be, it's a nice day today, isn't it? And that's a rhetorical question because it's quite clear when I say that to a group that not only is it a leading question, not only is it a closed question, it's also a rhetorical question because it doesn't require a response. Remember to breathe. That's one of the most amazing ones I've seen. I remember listening to a public speaker she was so interesting, but she was so terrified that she would talk until she ran out of breath, and then the voice would drail away at the end, and then blah 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 blah. And those breaths where it would sound like she was being revived after suffocating with every breath was so jarring to the audience that literally the entire audience would with her with every single breath. So just remember to breathe, keep it natural, take your time. At the end of the day, no one knows what you're supposed to say. No one knows if you've skipped content, unless, of course, it's actually got a jarring difference in the middle. And, of course, the biggest part is just relax. And there are lots of techniques that people have talked about relaxing, and I do just want to sort of address it towards the end when I talk about other key things. Now, when you close out a speech, restate your key points. So really just you've sort of said at the beginning of the speech, these are sorts of things that I'm going to cover. Just restate your key points. And same with an essay or a debate, give a conclusion. Actually allow people to say, right, that's okay, yes, that's good. I always say end on a powerful or a light note. A powerful note might be the fact if you're speaking and you need people to go away and have action, really light a fire under them. Really give them that sense of urgency as to why they need to go away and do it. Sometimes I might say end on a light note, because if it was more of a briefing, you end on a light note because it's a much happier, kinder, funner way to open. I mean, and again, this comes down to who's your audience and what you're trying to tell them. If I'm standing there and I'm talking to a bunch of employees that are about to be made redundant, and I'm talking to them about their redundancy package, I'm probably not going to end on a light note. Or with a joke, otherwise lest someone slash the tyres in my car. So that lends me down to remember I may want people to take action. Thank people. Always say thanks for listening. At that point, you can open the floor to questions. And if you do have questions, at the end of the questions, you also restate your key points as well, just so that people remember exactly what it is that you were there to talk about. In terms of closing the speech, and so these are some other things that I want to say. I've heard lots of advice about relaxing. Now, here are some horrible ones. So picture everyone naked. And I remember a public speaker teacher telling me this. Because then you feel that everyone's as vulnerable as you are. No, they're not. I'm the vulnerable one standing on stage. I'm already nervous. I'm already distracted enough. I don't want to be trying to picture a whole bunch of unattractive or attractive people, because they're both as distracting. I don't want to think of people sitting there naked in their underwear or in compromising positions while I'm actually trying to give a speech. What I do say, though, is I then focus on the material. Rather than, I don't look at them if I don't want to. I don't make eye contact with them if I don't want to. I look at their foreheads, and I say, look at people's foreheads, because from a distance of more than 2 or 3 meters, it actually looks like you're making eye contact. I look at people's foreheads, I relax, I stay focused on it, because at the end of the day, one of those famous truisms is never listen to gossip about yourself, because it was never meant for your ears anyway. So in that case, it doesn't matter what other people think of me at that moment. I'm just going to focus on the content. And at the end of the day, most people are so grateful that it's not them standing up there talking. that they are, that they're not going to be judging me. And this comes down to the whole thing of relevance. People are going to engage with the content if they love the content more than they're going to judge you as a speaker. Talking about mistakes, I thought I'd actually brought myself to a closing out slide, but clearly I haven't. So really then, I'm going to follow my own medicine. I'm going to deal with the mistake that I've made, and I am going to close out with my key points. And my key points are, make sure that you're prepared. Make sure that you've actually analysed who it is that you're speaking to, why you're speaking to them. I've focused on the content. Once I actually go there, before I give the speech, I breathe, I relax, I warm up my body. When I'm giving the speech, I actually open up with a light note. I have a bit of a laugh. I tell an amusing anecdote. I tell an anecdote that perhaps is relevant or that kicks off the whole thing. Proverbs are great for things like that. Then when I'm speaking, I'm not paying attention necessarily to what people are saying or doing. I'm actually staying relaxed. I'm not picturing them naked. I met a public speaker coach once who said, picture everyone on the toilet when you're speaking. No, thank you. I prefer to focus on what I'm saying and just get through it. So I breathe, I relax, I take my time with the content. It's okay to pause. I then close off the speech by restating my key points. I might actually end on a really powerful note because I want people to go away and take action. I'll then open up the floor for people to have any questions about anything that I haven't addressed. And then, of course, I will restate my key points. And before I walk off the stage or out of the room, or before I close down and sit back down at my chair, I will say thank you all very much for listening. And on that note, I will